Chapter 1. Abandoned in the Cold. The last thing I remembered before the darkness took me was the sound of the airlock hissing shut. The echo of it rang through my skull like a death knell, sealing my fate in the void of space. My body ached, my breathing was ragged, and my mind reeled from the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. I had been left behind. By her. Captain Scylla Varen of the Zevran Dominion. A woman who had fought beside me, saved my life more times than I could count, and yet, when the moment came, she had made a choice, and that choice was to leave me behind on this cold, desolate planet with no way to survive. I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense. Just hours ago, we had been escaping together, running from the bounty hunters that had been sent after us, our ship barely holding together from the damage sustained during the ambush. She had been wounded, blood slicking down her side, but still moving, still fierce and determined. I had carried her through the wreckage of the downed vessel, fought off the mercenaries who had been waiting to collect the bounty on our heads, and somehow I had managed to get us to the emergency shuttle. And then, she had turned on me. She had shoved me backward, hitting the emergency override, locking me outside as the hatch began to seal. I had pounded against the reinforced glass, my voice raw with rage and confusion, demanding to know why, but all she had given me was one last, unreadable look before the engines roared to life, the shuttle breaking through the atmosphere, disappearing into the dark expanse of space. And then there was silence. I was alone. A wave of pure, bone-deep exhaustion washed over me as I collapsed onto the frozen ground. The planet around me was a wasteland, the air thin and frigid, the sky a swirling mass of dark clouds. A storm was coming. I could feel it in the way the ground trembled beneath me, in the way the wind cut through my torn jacket like a blade. I knew the truth before I even tried to move. I wouldn't last the night. The cold would take me before anything else could. I forced myself to take slow, even breaths, trying to conserve what little warmth I had left, trying to push back the creeping numbness in my limbs. My mind raced, searching for some kind of answer, some kind of reason why Scylla had done this to me. Had I been a liability? Had she seen me as deadweight? Or was it something deeper? Betrayal. It sat like a lead weight in my chest, crushing, suffocating. I had trusted her, and she had left me here to die. The fight to survive. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, my body slowly succumbing to the cold, my mind slipping into a haze of memories and half-formed thoughts. But somewhere in the back of my head, a single, desperate instinct remained. Survive. If I stayed still, I was dead. That much was certain. So I forced myself to move, every joint screaming in protest as I pushed up onto my elbows. The effort was enough to send a wave of dizziness crashing through me, but I gritted my teeth, focusing. I had to find shelter. I scanned my surroundings, my vision blurry from the cold, but even in the dim light, I could make out the jagged shapes of rock formations rising in the distance. If I could make it there, maybe just maybe I could find some kind of cover. I dragged myself forward, my fingers digging into the frozen ground, my breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. Every step was a battle, every movement an effort against the crushing weight of exhaustion. My body was shutting down, and I knew I was running out of time. The storm was closer now, the wind howling through the empty landscape, carrying with it the distant rumble of thunder. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the vast nothingness that stretched around me. I was truly alone here. And yet, I kept moving, crawling, stumbling, fighting against the inevitable. The rocks grew closer, their jagged edges like the teeth of some long-dead beast, their dark forms promising at least some kind of reprieve from the relentless cold. But as I reached them, as I pulled myself against the rough surface and let my body collapse into the shallow cave-like opening, my strength finally gave out. Darkness pressed in around me, and for the first time, I wondered if I should stop fighting. Maybe it would be easier to just let go. She came back. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Hours. Maybe a day. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes, the storm had come and gone, leaving the landscape covered in a thick layer of frost. The air was still bitterly cold, but there was light now, a pale glow breaking through the heavy clouds. And then I saw her, Scylla, standing at the mouth of the cave, her tall, elegant frame wrapped in thick furs, Her violet eyes shadowed with something unreadable. For a moment, I thought she was a hallucination, a cruel trick of my dying mind. But then she moved toward me, kneeling beside me, her hand brushing against my forehead, and the warmth of her touch sent a shock through my frozen body. She was real, and she had come back. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to ask why she had left me here, but my throat was too dry, my voice too weak. All I could do was stare at her, my mind a chaotic mess of emotions. She looked down at me, her expression pained. "I thought you were dead," she said softly. Rage burned through the fog of exhaustion. I tried to speak, to push myself up, but my body refused to cooperate. "You left me," I finally managed to rasp. Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt. Real, undeniable guilt. "I had no choice," she whispered. "They were tracking me. If I had stayed, they would have taken us both." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hate her. But all I could do was listen as she reached for me, pulling me against her, wrapping me in warmth I no longer understood. She had come back, but I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. And that was the worst part, because some part of me still wanted to. Chapter 2. A debt that cannot be repaid. The warmth of her touch was almost unbearable after so many hours of freezing numbness. My body rebelled against it, my nerves burning as sensation returned in painful waves. My muscles ached, stiff and unresponsive, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I could hear the wind outside the cave, but it was distant now, muted by the furs she had wrapped around me. Scylla sat close, her body heat radiating into mine. Her presence a cruel contradiction. The same woman who had left me for dead now cradled me against her, as if I were something fragile, something precious. My mind was too fogged to fully comprehend what was happening. But the anger was there, simmering beneath the surface, tangled with exhaustion and confusion. I forced my voice through dry, cracked lips. "You left me." It wasn't a question. Scylla's grip tightened for a fraction of a second, but when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost too soft for someone like her. "I had no choice. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the memory of the airlock slamming shut, of her expression as she left, was burned into me like a scar that would never fade." I turned my head slowly, blinking against the dim light that filtered through the cave's entrance. "Bullshit," I rasped. "You made a choice." Scylla was silent. The fire she had built crackled between us, its flickering light casting long shadows across the cavern walls. I could see her now, really see her, the exhaustion in her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the guilt that she tried to keep hidden behind her cold, unreadable expression. She had changed clothes, swapping her usual combat gear for something more suited to the cold. Her dark violet hair was tied back, her normally sharp, piercing gaze distant. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, she exhaled. "You're right," she admitted. "I made a choice." I felt something twist in my chest, but I didn't let her see it. "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why come back at all?" Scylla looked away, staring at the flames. When she spoke, her voice was thick with something unfamiliar, something raw. "Because I couldn't leave you." I laughed bitterly, the sound breaking into a cough. "You already did." She flinched, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Memories of the past. I woke to the feeling of something warm pressed against my lips. Water. Cool, clean, sliding down my throat in slow, careful sips. Scylla was holding a metal flask, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "You need to drink more," she said. I ignored her, shifting slightly, testing my body. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my limbs, but I was alive. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the soft hum of wind against the cave walls. Scylla sat cross-legged beside the fire, still watching me. I met her gaze. "Tell me the truth." Her jaw tightened. "I already did." "No, you didn't," I countered, forcing myself upright. My muscles screamed in protest, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. "You say you had no choice, but you're here now. Why?" Scylla's expression flickered just for a second. Then she sighed. "I left because I thought it was the only way to keep you alive," she admitted. "The bounty hunters weren't just after me. They had orders to take you too." That made me pause. I had known we were both targets, our ship had been shot down, after all, but I hadn't realized why they wanted me. Why would they care about me? I asked. Scylla hesitated. Because of what you know. I frowned. I'm a mechanic, Scylla, a salvage expert. I don't have any state secrets. Her gaze darkened. No, but you saw something you weren't supposed to. The pieces started falling into place. The attack hadn't been random. It hadn't been about her alone. It had been about me, too. And suddenly, the betrayal didn't seem as simple as I had thought. The weight of regret. I wanted to hate her. I really, really did. But as I looked at her now, her usual unshakable confidence cracked at the edges. The walls she always kept up starting to crumble. I felt something else creeping in. Something I didn't want to name. She had left me to die, and yet, she had come back. And the way she looked at me now, like she had been carrying the weight of that decision since the moment she made it so much harder to hold on to the anger. Scylla rubbed a hand over her face, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen her. I thought they'd lose interest in you once I was gone, she admitted. That they'd leave you alone. I was wrong. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat. Damn right you were. She gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Yeah. For a while, we just sat there, the fire crackling between us, the silence filled with all the things we couldn't say. Then, finally, I exhaled. So what now? Scylla met my gaze, her eyes steadier now. Now, we fix what I broke, she said. And for the first time since she came back, I believed her. Chapter 3. A Dangerous Alliance. The fire between us had burned low, its embers glowing in the dim light of the cave. The storm outside had passed, leaving the frozen landscape in eerie silence, broken only by the distant sound of shifting ice and the occasional whisper of the wind. I sat propped against the rough stone wall, my body still aching from the cold and exhaustion, but my mind was far from restful. Scylla sat across from me, her violet eyes unreadable, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her pulse knife as if lost in thought. She had come back, but that didn't change what she had done. And yet, despite everything, we were here now, trapped in this fragile ceasefire, both knowing that the real fight was still ahead of us. I had spent the last few hours replaying everything she had told me, trying to piece together the truth from the fragments she had given me. The bounty hunters that had taken down our ship weren't just after her. It had been after both of us. I had believed, up until that moment, that I had just been collateral damage, caught in the crossfire of her endless list of enemies. But that wasn't it. They had wanted me, specifically. That realization gnawed at the back of my mind, stirring something close to dread. I wasn't anyone important. I was a mechanic, a scavenger, a man who fixed things that other people had broken. I didn't deal in state secrets, I didn't work for any faction, and I sure as hell wasn't involved in anything worth killing over. And yet, someone wanted me dead, or worse alive, but in their hands. That part worried me more. Scylla had given me vague answers, half-truths wrapped in careful wording. I wasn't naive enough to believe she had told me everything. But one thing was clear, she had come back for a reason. The real question was it guilt? Or was it something else? I exhaled, shifting slightly. The movement sent a sharp pain through my ribs, reminding me just how close I had come to dying out there. Scylla's gaze flickered toward me, her expression carefully neutral. How bad? She asked. I huffed a humorless laugh. Well, I was half frozen and left to die in a blizzard, so, not great. She didn't react to the jab. She just studied me for a long moment, then tossed something across the fire. A small metal cylinder landed near my hand. I frowned, picking it up. It was an auto-suture injector, a high-grade one too expensive, usually reserved for military medics. Where the hell did you get this? I asked. Scylla shrugged. Took it off one of the hunters. I narrowed my eyes. Before or after you killed them? She didn't answer. Yeah, that's what I thought. I pressed the injector to my ribs, flinching as it hissed, the nanofibers weaving into my torn muscles, numbing the pain almost instantly. It wasn't a full fix, but it would keep me from feeling like I'd been trampled by a skiff hauler. I sighed, letting my head rest back against the cave wall. All right, Scylla, start talking. Why were they after me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her belt pouch, pulling out a small hollow disc. She activated it, and a grainy, flickering image appeared above the FireRate data file. Its contents scrambled and corrupted, but one thing stood out clear as day. My name. My stomach twisted. What the hell is this? Scylla's expression was grim. It's why I left you. That didn't make me feel any better. I studied the file, my mind racing. Why would my name be in an encrypted bounty log? Scylla leaned forward, her voice quieter now. It's not just your name. It's a list of people the Dominion wants erased. People who know things they shouldn't. I clenched my jaw. I don't know anything. Her eyes met mine. Are you sure about that? I opened my mouth to argue, but then I remembered. The wreck. The derelict ship we had salvaged 6 months ago. The one Scylla had insisted was nothing more than an old war relic, abandoned and worthless. But it hadn't been worthless. It had been hiding something. I had been the one to pull the flight logs, the encrypted data cores, the sealed black box transmissions. And at the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I had handed it all off to Scylla, assuming she would sell it to the highest bidder like we always did. But what if it had been something more? What if I had seen something I wasn't supposed to? Scylla must have caught the shift in my expression, because she nodded. You remember now, don't you? I swallowed hard. It was just a salvage job. No, she said. It wasn't. I ran a hand down my face. So what was it then? What the hell did I find? Scylla hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. My stomach dropped. You knew, I said, my voice tight. You knew it wasn't just another wreck? Her jaw clenched. I suspected. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. So what? You just let me walk right into it? Let me pull the data, knowing full well it might put a target on my back? I didn't think they would come after you, she said, and for the first time, her voice wasn't calm and controlled. It was frustrated. I thought they would come after me. I thought I could lead them away. That's why I left. My breath came shallow and uneven. She hadn't left me because she didn't care. She had left me because she did. But that didn't make it right. I forced myself to take a slow breath, trying to untangle the knots in my mind. Okay, I said finally. So what now? Scylla's expression was unreadable. Now, we run. I exhaled. Again? She smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. Again. I sighed, rubbing a hand through my hair. Yeah, figures. We weren't getting out of this clean, but at least this time, we were in it together. Chapter 4. The Last Stand. The storm had passed, but the danger had not. The cave that had once been our shelter was now nothing more than a temporary refuge, and we both knew it. We couldn't stay here. The bounty hunters had been relentless, tracking us across the frozen wasteland, and even though we had a moment to breathe, it wouldn't last. They would come again, and this time, they wouldn't just be hunting Scylla. They would be hunting me. I sat near the fire, staring at the hollow disk Scylla had shown me. My name, embedded in a classified Dominion kill list, marked as a target for erasure. It still didn't feel real. I had always been careful. I had always made sure to stay under the radar, avoiding the kinds of jobs that could get me tangled up in political games or military secrets. And yet, here I was. Scylla sat across from me, her gaze sharp, calculating. She had changed since she first came back. The guilt that had once flickered behind her eyes was still there. But now, there was something else. Determination. We can't outrun this, I said finally, breaking the silence. She nodded. I know. Then what's the plan? Scylla exhaled, running a hand through her dark violet hair. We fight. I barked a humorless laugh. Fight? Against who, exactly? The entire damn Dominion? She smirked, but there was no humor in it. Not the whole Dominion, just the ones coming after us. I shook my head, rubbing my temples. This was insane. We can't just take them head on, I said. They have ships, guns, resources. Scylla leaned forward. We don't need to beat them, she said. We just need to make them think we already lost. I frowned. What does that mean? She picked up a small device from her belt, a signal scrambler, its tiny lights flickering. They're tracking us through long-range scanners. If we can disrupt their readings, make it look like we died here, they'll call off the hunt. I narrowed my eyes. You really think they'll believe that? She tilted her head. It depends on how convincing we are. I sighed. Of course it had to be a gamble. But what other choice did we have? Setting the trap. The plan was simple in theory, but execution was going to be hell. First, we had to make it look like we never left the planet. That meant leaving behind evidence wreckage, falsified distress signals, anything that would sell the story. We spent the next few hours rigging the cave with explosive charges, setting up a controlled detonation that would bury our trail under tons of rock and ice, making it look like we had been caught in a cave-in. Next, we needed to disappear. There was an old crashed freighter about 20 miles from our position, buried under ice and forgotten by time. If we could get to it, we could use its low-frequency comms to piggyback onto one of the old Dominion relay satellites, sending out a false final transmission before scrambling our signals completely. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was our only shot. We set out before dawn, moving fast, keeping low. The cold bit at my skin, even through the layers of gear, but I didn't slow down. Neither did she. We reached the wreckage just as the first signs of pursuit appeared on the horizon. 3 ships, sleek and predatory, circling like vultures. They weren't attacking yet, but they were watching, waiting. Scylla worked quickly, her fingers moving over the console of the old ship's comm system, bypassing century-old firewalls with a precision that reminded me why she was so damn dangerous. "I need another minute," she muttered. "We don't have a minute," I said, glancing at the approaching ships. "They won't fire yet," she said, voice steady. "They don't know if we're worth killing." I clenched my jaw. That wouldn't last. Then, the console beeped, and Scylla's expression shifted. "We're in." She tapped a few commands, and suddenly, the freighter's comms flared to life, sending out a broadcast pulse distress signal, a desperate final transmission, our deaths written in real time. I held my breath. The ships hovered. Then, slowly, they began to turn away. It worked. It actually worked. I let out a breath, turning to Scylla. "Remind me to never underestimate you again." She smirked. "Took you long enough to figure that out." But I wasn't celebrating yet, because just as the last ship disappeared from sight, Scylla stiffened, her hand moving instinctively to her pulse knife. We weren't alone. A figure emerged from the wreckage, stepping into the pale light of dawn. Not a bounty hunter, not a soldier, someone worse. The man was tall, his features sharp, his eyes gleaming with the kind of cold intelligence that sent a chill down my spine. His uniform was pristine, unlike the mercenaries who had been chasing us. He wasn't here to hunt. He was here because he already knew the truth. "Impressive," he said, his voice smooth, calculated. "Most people don't escape the Dominion once they're marked." Scylla didn't move. "Who the hell are you?" The man smiled. "Someone who's been watching for a long time." I stepped forward, my fingers twitching toward my weapon. "If you're here to take us in, you're wasting your time." The man tilted his head. "On the contrary, I think you and I have a lot to talk about." Scylla's grip tightened. "Not interested." The man chuckled. "You might want to reconsider." Then he tossed something to the ground between us. A data core. I stared at it, my stomach twisting, because I recognized it. It was from the wreck. The same wreck that had gotten us into this mess. The man smiled. "I know what you found," he said. "I know why the Dominion wants you dead." My pulse pounded. "And why is that?" His gaze sharpened. "Because you found something that wasn't meant to be found." I felt Scylla tense beside me. I swallowed. "And what do you want?" The man's smile widened. "To help you." I didn't trust him. Not for a second. But the way Scylla was looking at him, the way her expression had shifted from anger to something else, something almost like recognition, made me realize something terrifying. She knew who he was. And that meant, whether I liked it or not, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot.